Hi, welcome to the CCW Safe podcast. I am Rob High in Oklahoma City, joined by my partner, Phillip Naman. Phil, you're back home in the land of the lost.
Yes, the People's Republic of Occupied California,
There you go.
behind enemy lines.
Welcome home. I understand you just got back from a nice trip with your wife, so hope everything went well and she'll stick around for another year or two. So,
well, I made it home alive, so I think that's a good indicator.
That's a positive indicator. We are so excited today to introduce you guys to Sarah Albrecht. Sarah is very passionate about her work, her mission, and I think it's something that does not get nearly enough thought and recognition as far as gun owners go, and part of our responsibility of being a responsible gun owner. So Sarah, if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about you, where you're from, what you're doing, and then we'll browbeat you after that. How about that?
Sounds like a great game plan, Rob. Rob and Phillip, thank you for having me today. So my name is Sarah Joy Albrecht, and I'm the founder and executive director for HoldMyGuns. We are a 501c3 nonprofit, and we partner with FFLs across the United States to provide voluntary firearm storage during times of crisis or personal need, such as during deployment, or if a gun owner maybe is selling their home and they don't want to have their firearms in their car or storage bin or their hotel room. So our goal is to help reduce suicide, accidental shootings, and really by that we mean negligence, because they can be prevented, and also theft of firearms and stolen firearms used in crimes. And we do this in a way that helps to preserve rights. It takes a proactive approach, and it is also a non-legislative approach, which is so important. So we're very just proud about the work that we've done, and more importantly of the firearms community. And our goal is to encourage people and to help them to plan ahead and know that they have options. And so even in this year since SHOT Show, we had 2 gun owners store firearms with us, and we didn't ask why, but they were very grateful, and it helped to support their needs. So we hope to continue to expand, and we really appreciate the work that you're doing as well to educate people and to help them to be prepared for whatever life hands them as well. So thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you. It's just one of those things that, yes, it is our right to keep and bear arms. It's a right that I believe is worth protecting, but part of that also is our personal responsibilities to doing that as safely as possible. You and I have talked previously. I love your mission. I like the things that are possible for you. And there's so many things out there that people just don't really give a lot of thought to ahead of time. Mm-hmm. I've got a big safe. My stuff is locked up. It's secure. Not everybody does. Some people have, just a gun lock on their firearm individually. But this goes beyond. We have still have issues with veteran suicides in the country. Mm-hmm. And these are also means that these guys can step out and go kind of in a dark spot right now. But if you don't know where to reach out to for help, if you don't know some of the venues that are available and some of the things that you guys are opening up for them, they're afraid that if somebody finds out that I'm dealing with issues, that somebody's going to come take my guns away from me, and then they're gone. This is a means to be self-sufficient and proactive and I'm going to take this step myself as I'm going through this chapter, then I don't have to go through the courts again to go through all that to try to get my firearms returned. I think that's a huge bonus for some of these guys, and understanding that options are available kind of relieve some of the tensions of that. So
Yes.
How would, let me go a completely different route.
Okay.
Say I'm fostering a child, and I get a child in the house that has some mental health issues or some anger issues and things like that. And suddenly it's probably not the best situation to have firearms in the home with this child. And how can I go about that? And so I reach out to you, and what do we do?
That's a great question, Rob. Basically what you would do is go to our website and find a location near you. We currently have 3 locations with more in the works. Hopefully one soon in Washington State and one in Georgia. So those are upcoming. But again, our goal is to expand across the United States. And from there, you would contact our storage partner and say, hey, I would like for you to hold my guns. And they would help you to set up an appointment. And then you would bring in your firearms. And again, this is voluntary. So this needs to be, the gun owner cannot be a prohibited person. We are limited to help people who are not prohibited. And we follow a consignment and consignment return process, which basically means that the gun owner is still the owner of the firearm, but they transfer temporary possession to that FFL, that retail FFL. And what that means is that gun shop then they're holding on to it for you, and they are required, just like if it were a consignment transaction, actual consignment transaction, that they have it in their best interest to protect your property. And we require that those FFL partners carry a general liability insurance, so that if that location, for example, might have some natural disaster happen, that your firearms would be covered under that insurance. So we really take it seriously. As a gun owner myself, I have invested in purchasing firearms and related accessories, and so we want to make sure that that they are properly cared for in a way that they'll, when they're returned to that gun owner, when they come back to pick them up, that they're in the same condition, and maybe even cleaned. If that gun owner asks for extra work to be done, it could happen. But basically you would make an appointment and you would say, hey, I'm ready to pick up my firearms now. And you would work with them to come pick up that firearm or firearms. And as we follow that consignment return regulation, we do require 4473 at the time of pickup. And again, they have to attest that they're not a prohibited person and they're lawfully able to possess a firearm and pass that background check. That being said, we can also store non-serialized critical parts such as a barrel or a firing pin. So, perhaps if somebody has a firearm that they just want to keep at their house, but make sure that it is not going to be operable. That is a way operational. That's a way that they can help to mitigate that temptation to use that firearm in a harmful way. So I just wanted to put that out there as well. And that being said, if someone is in need and they can't find a location close to them, please give us a call. We do have some other options across the United States. And we also want for people to know that they're supported in whatever situation they're going through. So don't hesitate to reach out. And if you are an FFL that is interested in working with us, please get in touch. We are, again, looking to just expand across the United States. And it's important to have partners in each state, because many times gun laws vary from state to state, and we would never want for someone to have to choose between unlawfully driving across state lines with a magazine that has a couple more rounds than what's allowed, right? And make that choice between that and maybe helping to prevent a teenager and suicide crisis in their household from having access to that firearm. So we never want people to have to choose. And that's why it's so important that our community takes leadership to provide this option for gun owners. So Rob, you had mentioned veterans, and also I want to point out that we have a collaboration with the Northwest Pennsylvania Suicide Prevention Project here, and we're seeing the fruit of that. We really have a heart for working with veterans. My dad served in the Marine Corps in Vietnam, and so and I have several family members who have served, and it is something that's very dear to my heart. We also hear from folks in law enforcement. Maybe it's the anniversary of their partner's death, and they just need to get over that tough weekend, for example, and they can take their personal firearm to one of our FFL partners and store it, and just discreetly get over that hurdle so that they don't have to make a big deal about it. Like you said, there can be a lot of stigma, and even with best intentions in and policies in place with careers that are sensitive like that, there's still a lot of stigma and trepidation for someone to actually like report it or bring in their firearm to like a community locker or something like that. So we want people to know that that option is there. I started Hold My Guns because we lost an 18-year-old friend to suicide by firearm, and I'm a range safety officer. And when my kids and the members in our community came to me and they're like, Mom, we value our right to bear arms. My kids all grew up around firearms. They shoot in a rifle league. I have a distinguished expert, 2 experts and 2 sharpshooters. So firearms are very much a part of our lives. And they said, Mom, we want to make sure that these rights are preserved, but our friend is dead. How can we help people in crisis? Not everyone has a friend or a family member that people feel like they can ask to help store a firearm, or who's lawfully able to do that. And even if they do have a firearm safe, and their 2-year-old's not going to get into that firearm while they're storing it for a friend who's in crisis, it doesn't mean that that person is going to be quiet about it. And so it would be really awful if maybe we're all out with friends and then someone says like, hey, bye, a couple drinks go by, and then all of a sudden it's like, hey, I have Sarah's firearms, right? So we want to make sure that this service is professional and discreet, which is why we partner with FFLs, because again, we know that not everybody has friend or family members who are qualified or trustworthy to store firearms. And another thing to just encourage people about, or to help them think about, is that you mentioned, Rob, that you have a firearm safe. Not everybody does. Certainly we recommend that, and I applaud you for having one. Prior to founding Hold My Guns, I was a doula, which basically means that I help in delivery rooms, and also a childbirth educator for 11 years. And I specialized in helping clients who had experienced sexual trauma, which puts them more at risk for postpartum depression. And I had a client who called me and she said, Sarah, I have the gun safe open and I just can't do this anymore. I can't just live another day like this. And she had a colicky baby who was having some eating issues, and then a bunch of young kids under the age of 5, and she wasn't sleeping, and there wasn't really good self-care there. And her husband owned a company, and he was doing his best to provide for his family, but his wife wasn't able to get the support that she needed. And she was trying to really be tough about it, but it just all, came to a head. And it was one of those tough days. And I said, I lived close enough. I said, I will be right over, walk away, close that door and walk away. And she did. And myself and one of our mutual friends, with her consent, came over and we unloaded her firearms. I brought her a freezer meal. We had her take a nap, and we're like, okay, dinner's going to be in the oven. We're going to watch your kids, just relax. And she's still with us today. And really, my point in sharing this is that even when you have, the best firearm safe, if you still have someone who has access to that safe and they're having a tough time, like during postpartum depression, or maybe they've experienced some other, earth-shattering trauma, like, a tough medical diagnosis or whatever, that can be a temptation to open that safe and to use that firearm in a harmful way on themselves. So what I encourage, and what we have been sharing with everyone, is the importance of having a personal safety plan and helping people to think, if I were in crisis, or if someone in my home were in crisis, what is our plan for lethal means, and making sure that we have a plan, such as taking that firearm to a Hold My Guns location if, God forbid, one of us were ever in crisis. And we also, in that plan, have sections in there where people can fill out, what are some of my coping mechanisms? What are some things that I want from my care team to remember, such as, I feel whenever I hear fireworks, that loud noise scares me, and it makes me think about when I have been in combat, or I've been in a situation where, I'm being shot at. And so, help me when it's this time, don't get angry with me, but instead here are the things that help me to feel better. There's sections in that plan about self-care, about making sure that, you're sleeping and hydrating and eating. All of those things can really, if you have deficits in those areas, can really help to, or can really impair judgment. So it's a proactive plan. It's multifaceted. And then we also have a place in there where people can write down their preferred care providers, such as their doctors, their mental health professionals, their pastor or counselor, their battle buddy. We want to make sure that all of those critical contacts are readily accessible. And this is a PDF that people can print out so they can keep it, on their person or in a place that is safe. It doesn't have to be shared with anybody, but if you are in crisis and you don't have access to that information, sometimes it can just really make you be along for the ride. And the more people can prepare ahead of time, just like if they're a member with you, right, that you're helping them to prepare ahead of time, then the less that they are going to be spinning in a time of crisis, and the more prepared they're going to be, and the more agency they will have if they're in crisis, because their wishes will be heard and honored because they have already articulated exactly the plan that works best for them. So that's a mouthful, but like you said, Rob, I'm passionate about this. And I hope that people who hear this, again, know that they have options, but are also motivated to plan ahead. And that way they can have agency if they are ever in a time of crisis.
That's really the biggest reason I wanted to get you in here. Truly, there are so many things out there, so many different factors that can weigh in. The very first police officer I ever trained was killed in the line of duty. Awesome man. His name was Jeff Rominger, and he was killed in an accident, a vehicle accident, but it was in a pursuit. And another officer lost his life as well. And that's one of those things that I will remember forever.
Yes.
I've lost other partners. I lost an academy classmate. That same thing. He was involved in a pursuit. There's so many different issues that are so dangerous for law enforcement, fire, ambulance personnel. First responders are really, really at risk on things that you just don't think about on a day-to-day. And then those anniversaries come up, and they are big steps. They're things that have to be thought out. Same way with our military veterans that have lost friends in combat, or there's other things that people just really don't ever think about unless you've been in those shoes. And you get those guys that have gone in and really been involved in some really hairy stuff. And the bonds that you develop with the people that you're there with are lifetime bonds. There's nothing that matches that. And then upon your separation, that's gone, because I've been on both sides of that. The guys that are in that unit suddenly know that it is just next man up. I can't be all worried about the fact that Sarah's not with us anymore. Now I know that Phil is Sarah's replacement and Phil's my guy, and that's what we have to do. And all of a sudden you're like, what do I do now? Because I was just part of this amazing thing, and now nobody cares. Well, they do. It's just feeling that loss, And there's some of those guys, I kind of like the way they look at it, is like the realization that I'm never going to be as cool as I once was. That's really not it, but
Right. Yes.
it's that kind of bond that really is really difficult to replace. Phil and I do a lot of talk about training. We talk a lot about de-escalation and things like that. De-escalation can be a self-de-escalation as well.
Yes.
And I know that you are really big on the training aspect as well, like you were just mentioning. There's so many things out there that people are really not aware of unless you happen to work at one of these places or you're present when it occurs. But the numbers of suicides that take place at gun ranges, I don't have to have a gun. All of a sudden this happens and I show up and we've got a couple of really big, nice ranges here in Oklahoma City. And I know for a fact that they have had this experience. So the ability to come in and train your personnel, give them things to look for. It's just something that goes beyond just my right to have a gun. It's the responsibility to make sure that all of us are safe and have a means to this kind of education and things. So, I know that you have the relationship with QPR in this institute.
Yes.
Amazing training. And they do all aspects. They can do individual things or organizational things, and I think those things are critical, especially for guys that are teaching a lot of classes and doing a lot of things. So how about you talk about that for just a little bit?
Thank you, Rob.
Go ahead.
Yes, go ahead.
Just to come back on one of the things you said earlier, when somebody's picking one up, just to get the operational part of this down, you have a 4473 they fill out. Do they need to redrose their firearms?
Can you say the last? Say it one more time.
So when they're coming back in to pick up their firearms, you said they fill out a 4473, which is the attestation that I'm not a prohibited person. Do the firearms have to be redrosed? Dealer record of sale, back to the FBI background check? Do they have to pay for that, or are they able just to pick it up and go home?
They do have to pay for the background check, and there are fees associated with storage. Again, we don't know why the individual is storing their firearm. So if we were just to say, hey, it's free if you're in crisis, then it would out somebody who might be in crisis. Also, with the background check and actually going through that process, not just attesting it, it does help to reduce liability to the gun shops so that they are not handing that firearm back to a prohibited person. And that is, it's a tough thing because on one hand, we want to have, I'm the kind of person that I think if a person has served their time, that they should be able to defend their life with a firearm if they're no longer in jail and they're no longer, caught up in that system. But we do have to be very careful to work within the requirements. And one of the ATF requirements for consignment return is that the 4473 is required and that a background check is required. So they have to go through that process. Now, in the future, if that changes, then our policy could change. But we extensively worked with our legal counsel, who's Joshua Prince, and he's phenomenal. He's very passionate about protecting and preserving rights, as well as our insurance, which that's a whole nother thing. It was quite a feat to be insured as a 501c3 who's storing firearms. So again, it's one of those things where the legislation that's out there, like the gun control legislation that's out there, that does kind of dictate how we operate in a regulated space. We have to work within the confines of that. But if a person, I get that.
So the other thing is, so if you're in a state that has a holding period, you will have to DROS See, I sold a gun on consignment, brought it back in, it didn't sell. So I had to dross it to myself. I had to wait the 10 days just to get my own firearm back. So make sure people were clear that it's just as if you're buying a firearm over again, whatever the regulations are in the state that you're in,
Yes.
that applies to this also.
I thank you for putting it that way, Philip. Yes. And it is, again, it is a frustrating thing. And I really disagree with the idea of waiting periods, but we're working in a regulated space. But I have heard from people who their firearms were confiscated because, they were in a situation where maybe someone had filed a protection from abuse order or something like that, or maybe, they were red flagged or something like that. And the amount of time that it took for them to go through the court systems and to get their firearms back, and then to try to, first to be allowed to possess a firearm again, and then to even get their firearms back if they ever were, that is a terrible process to go through. So while I disagree with that, and we have to follow the policies that are put forth by those states, the silver lining is that it's much better than losing your rights or losing your firearms. So, and again, you don't necessarily have to have a waiting period if you're storing a non-serialized critical part. So just keep that in mind. If someone's in a state where they do have waiting periods or something like that, that there are options that people can work with. That being said, the hard part was figuring out how do we store a completed firearm that has, a serial number on it. That was the really big obstacle to overcome. And we just want people to know that, that there are some options there. So does that answer your question, Phil?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Go back to your question then.
Yeah,
Sorry about that, Rob.
It's great. We don't want to lose that thought, right?
No,
That's
absolutely. Back to QPR stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Are you in a partnership with them? Do you have an affiliation with them? What is?
So I became certified last year as a QPR gatekeeper trainer, which means that I can offer that training. And it basically, people who take my classes can be certified as QPR gatekeepers, which QPR, we're just throwing that acronym around, stands for question, persuade, and refer. And it is likened to CPR for a crisis that's life-threatening, but in a more mental health kind of way. And so the goal of this training is to learn how to ask good questions and to determine if a person may be in a suicide crisis, to persuade or to talk with them and help to understand what their options are, and then refer them to appropriate care. And that's really important because as a range safety officer, I know from looking at some of our standard operating procedures at the ranges where I work, there's like, pages on what to do if there's a gunshot wound, but there's really nothing in those SOPs about how do we help people who might be experiencing a mental health crisis on the range. And so I advocate for range safety officers, instructors, people who work in gun shops and gun shop employees to have this important knowledge, how to talk to someone and de-escalate, and first to identify those warning signs, but also to know what resources are available, whether it's the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline or local resources, like many communities have crisis response teams. Even here in Pennsylvania, there is a group that specifically is for veterans. So, and they send out a counselor to help a veteran who's in crisis. So something that we do with HoldMyGuns is whenever we have a storage location, we have a little survey and we learn about what are the crisis response type resources in that area, and we make sure that that gun shop is aware of them. But in teaching QPR training, we want to make sure that people in the firearms community are also aware of those resources because they can be life-saving. I like it because it doesn't set up the firearms professional to be a counselor. That's not necessarily everyone's background, and so it reduces liability in a sense because there can be a process followed. Like, we saw this person behaving in a reckless way on the range. They seem to be trying to handle their firearm in a way that led us to believe they might, be thinking about self-harm, or maybe they were acting in an intoxicated way and they were not making sense. They weren't coherent, but they were talking about ending their own life. And so we, had them step away from the firearm. We made sure it was unloaded and we talked to them. And then we referred them to these services, and we made sure that, they made that call or whatever it might be. So having something in the SOP that would create a process so that gun ranges and retail locations know how to interact with that person to de-escalate it and to document it in a way that also reduces liability, not just because it's a checkbox and it's like this cold thing, but again, when you plan ahead and you have a process, you're not worried about, I wonder what the best practices are here. You have training, so it just automatically goes back to your training and you can act in a more coherent and efficient and fast way to help de-escalate something.
So
go ahead, Phil. Yeah.
Something like that. Have you created something that you could actually give to like the NRA that's part of their instructor package? I mean, is that something that you're working on or have done?
Well, not specifically with NRA, although I am a lifetime member of NRA. But
I just bring them up because they do so much of it. Like everybody's,
yes,
I'm NRA
no, it's
certified,
fine.
right? So
yes. So as far as I know, nobody else is offering QPR training directly in the firearms community. We've already trained over 50 individuals here in Pennsylvania at the Lower Providence Rod and Gun Club. And the response was overwhelming. Some people have already used their training to de-escalate suicide crises and mental health crises and referred people to care. I was recently asked by A Girl and a Gun, which is a national firearms organization for women, to come and teach QPR as a certificate course at their national conference coming up in April. There is a potential for perhaps up to 350 women, who many of them are firearms professionals, to take this course and to be certified. I really hope that as this momentum grows, that more organizations will see the value of it and see what a blind spot we have as a firearms community, that, we spend so much time preparing for a crisis where, what do you do if you're in a grocery store parking lot, it's dark at night and someone comes around a car, like we spend so much time thinking about that we ignore this blind spot of a crisis from within our own home or dealing with a mental health crisis and helping someone who is in distress and actively trying to take their own life. So I just hope that that more organizations will understand the value of this. We chose to work with QPR and to get this training. Myself and our treasurer, Paul Jones, also received this training certificate to allow us to help train others. And we did this because two of our board members, our former treasurer, as well as my co-founder, are firearms instructors. And they both had situations where someone called them up. In one case, that person came to the range, they were behaving strangely, and my co-founder stopped the lesson. They were like, I just don't think that today is a good day to be doing this. We really need to make sure that you have focus on what we're doing, handling these firearms safely, and I just don't think it's a good time. And that person said, actually, yeah, I'm really not having a good day, and you're right. And they never called her back, but they were safe on the range that day. And then our former treasurer, he had a situation where someone called, and as they were scheduling the class, they were asking questions that I think one of them was like, well, I have time alone on the range, and just maybe talking about like some of the reasons why they were interested in taking the class, but it just seemed kind of vague. And so he asked, I'm just wondering, like, are you thinking of taking your own life? And she said, actually, yes. And so we had a conversation about this, and my co-founder mentioned her situation, and we realized this is something that, it does happen in the firearms community. And so we decided, how cool would it be when someone is perhaps in crisis and they're looking up their local range and their local instructor and they're thinking of taking their own life. How amazing would it be if they saw that instructor or they saw that range and there was, a certificate, a QPR, certified in suicide prevention training. And instead of saying, I'm going to call this instructor because I'm going to use this opportunity to take my life, they saw that, wow, this person's a gun owner, is trained in suicide prevention training. They are a person that I can trust to get help, to ask to get help. So that is our hope. And again, those who took the training at Lower Providence, we've already received excellent feedback that they have used their training for good and to save lives. So I hope that it expands, and I hope that it'd be awesome if CCW Safe would just take that to heart too, as you offer training, to see the value of de-escalating in a mental health or suicide prevention crisis as well. So yeah.
I like that. What kind of talk me through as you were going through to get your training and be certified, kind of your length of time, what your investment is into that, just for people that might be interested in those things.
So the first step is to take the QPR Gatekeeper training, which is a basic course. It's about 3 hours. And in that, there's role playing, there's an understanding of, how to assess if a person might be in crisis. You really go through a lot of understanding risk factors and why a person's in crisis. You go through like statistics on suicide and emphasis on making sure that a person in crisis does not have immediate access to lethal means. Again, from our perspective, we want to make sure that people have a proactive plan. We're not advocating that people I'm not advocating for red flags, so I just have to say that. But we want for people to understand, like, hey, if you are around someone and they're in crisis, you want to make sure that they're not sitting right next to a firearm, or they're, have a bottle of pills there. It's like, okay, that bottle is open. How many have you taken? Like, it helps you to learn how to ask questions like that, knowing that those seconds can count. And so it's that kind of training. And then there's a role playing section that is really valuable, because sometimes, especially if you're not familiar with, it's not natural or normal for you to have these kind of intense conversations with someone, ask these hard questions. To have the opportunity to kind of put those thoughts and that training into words is really valuable. There's also review of different resources and what each resource has to offer, and how to ask people to connect with those resources, and understanding the importance of a warm handoff, understanding like, hey, can I have my cell phone with me, can we make this call together, things like that. So there's it's really helpful training. That's about 3 hours. And then the trainers, the trainer certificate course is an 8-hour course, and some places break it up over a number of days. I was really eager to do it, so I read through all the materials and then did the training in one day, and it was a very long day. But then we stay in touch with our local trainers, and I have sat in on different training opportunities, so and community connections through them as well. And that's a little bit more in depth. It's creating a plan. It is helping companies understand, how to look for a crisis. It's making sure that you are familiar with all the resources. It's a little bit more in depth on protective factors and risk factors, and understanding a little bit more about the psychology behind a suicide crisis, and that not everybody, for example, who is in crisis necessarily has a mental health diagnosis, and to understand with that risk factors and protective factors that a person can have all of these protective factors, but they're 1 or 2 risk factors that are just really pronounced, or maybe that's why they might be thinking of taking their own life. So it helps people to helps the trainers to have a better understanding of why someone is in crisis, so they're not making assumptions while they're talking to people. But again, it's more policy oriented and teaching people how to and facilitating, like, all right, how do you facilitate a group discussion if you're training people, that kind of thing. It was so valuable and eye-opening to me. I think taking that training has helped me to understand, I guess, how the big takeaway was that people carry around invisible burdens, and the analogy that they used was to carry them around in their invisible backpack that everybody carries. And when, for example, if someone's out at the range, we don't know if maybe they just had a parent who died, or maybe their spouse filed for divorce, or maybe they lost their job or something like that. And so we can't just be like, oh, is this person in a mental health crisis? It could be, wow, this person has a lot going on in their life. So how can we connect with them as one human to another, and not just, a person in crisis out in the line. So anyway, it's amazing. And I recently had the chance to talk with Paul Cornett, who is the founder of QPR, and he provided, just more information about firearms and statistics about deaths on gun ranges. Apparently it's about 100 a year. So that was an interesting statistic. And it just, again, it is something that can be prevented, I think, with more training and awareness. And so I hope to do that.
A couple things on, go ahead.
No, I said you had a question. What was it?
You mentioned some of the reasons that somebody would be feeling this way are transitory. I mean, I think that's pretty much the point. At that point in time, right, they're at the low spot. They're not going to stay there forever. And so with your actions and Hold My Gun, you're getting them through that point where they can find the help, get their life back on track, and realize that, the world didn't end yesterday. We talk about suicides. The #1 cause of death by firearm is self-inflicted homicides. I think we average, it's within 1,000 or two, between 32 and 33,000 a year homicides with a firearm. Homicide meaning any cause of death by firearm, not all murders. And somewhere in the neighborhood of 19,000 of those are suicides, 19 to 20, somewhere in that range. And then, it's amazing to me that that's where we're at. And what we're looking at is a huge society issue. It's a heart issue. It's not a firearm issue. It's not a gun control issue. It's a heart issue. You look at the same time, we've got 90,000 overdoses on opioids. Again, it's a heart issue. And that's, compliments you for reaching out, because that's where it really matters, is on the human level, not just the means of operation, that they chose this, or they drove off a cliff, or they were drunk driving and hit a wall. Those are all different types, but the means of operation is one thing, but the cause, the underlying part, again, murder has always been a heart issue from Cain and Abel on.
Yes.
And, that was a rock, and so we don't have rock control. But it's just important that you realize that these are, if somebody's in this dark zone, it's a transitory zone. And seeking help gets you out of it, not deciding to get there.
And we give them, by storing firearms and by talking with people in the range and de-escalating, we're giving people time and space to seek help, or to cool off, or let a terrible anniversary to pass, or whatever that might be. We're giving people the opportunity to choose life. And, like I said, I'm a range safety officer. Firearms have been a big part of our life for a long time. And some people say, well, I'm sure that someone else is, they can always overdose or whatever. And that certainly is the case. Firearms are our lane. And so I think we have a responsibility, whatever, our background might be, we need to use that for the best of our ability to help others and to create change. I certainly hope that the pharmaceutical industry does a better job of, reducing access to substances and doing a better job of controlling that, versus handing out, narcotics like candy.
That's a whole different show.
You know, right. So I hope that what we do in the firearms industry, you know, and what we do for liberty and to empower people to make good choices and to provide options like Hold My Guns and suicide prevention training, I hope that it serves as a catalyst for liberty that empowers other sectors to realize, hey, if we can educate people versus legislate solutions, that maybe more lives can be saved, and we can also help to change those hearts of people to realize, hey, I don't have to continue to live this way. I can seek help. Wouldn't it just be amazing if people saw what we're doing in the firearms community, which is so we're demonized because, oh, guns are terrible, you know. And you were mentioning about the number of suicides. Suicide is the #1 cause of firearms related deaths, and murders up there too, but suicide surpasses murder. But, you know, whenever we talk about firearms and whenever we talk about firearms, the media really ignores the self-defense aspect, and that is that there are up to 2 million defensive uses of firearms each year, which could be anything from someone, you know, kind of brandishing their firearm in a safe way and saying, look, don't mess with me, right? Or
The
to
defensive
actually use,
display.
right, it's
Exactly. That's another show.
Yes, but you understand what I'm saying.
Yes.
And the media often will overlook the defensive uses, and they'll have a hyper focus on the largest cause of firearms related deaths, and that's suicide. And then they weaponize suicides and mental health to push a legislative agenda. We have the opportunity in the firearms community to really sweep the legs out from underneath that, because if we can take responsibility for approximately 60% of all firearms related deaths, then we're also undermining 60% of that argument for gun control, and we're taking care of it in a way that promotes self-governance and the preservation of rights. I think there's a tremendous opportunity there to push back and not just be along for the ride on that terrible narrative that totally ignores self-defense uses of firearms every year.
I get where you're going on that, and I appreciate your heart, but one of the things you just said is that we're taking responsibility for the 60% of suicides, and that's something that law-abiding gun owners can't take responsibility for that. I mean, obviously, again, it comes back to being a heart issue. And so I don't think that because someone chose a particular mean to commit a suicide, that industry is demonized. You know, if they drove off a cliff, is GM in fault? So I think it's easy for
that is thin ice. Yes. And I want to be very clear, Philip, and I appreciate that you're pointing that out, because I don't want this to be twisted in any way. I think that whatever industry that we're in and whatever means and resources that we have, that we should be aware of things such as suicide if people are using our items in a way that is unsafe. And I think we have a responsibility. For example, you wouldn't just hand a firearm to someone, you know, as an instructor and just say, here, go have fun. You would say, here's how you're safe with the firearm. And I think that we have an opportunity to instruct people, by the way, if you're ever in crisis, here are some options.
I think we have an opportunity, exactly.
Right. But there's a very clear delineation between holding a manufacturer responsible for somebody's heart, or somebody, you know, having a firearms instructor be responsible for what, you know, what a person is, their intentions. We don't know what a person's intentions are. And that's very important for Hold My Guns, is we don't ask people because we respect privacy, and we don't think that we know that whatever reason that person is choosing on their own to store their firearms, that is their business. I don't want to make that leap to say that, you know, I disagree with those who say that they're responsible, but at the same time, we do want to educate people, and we educate people because we care about firearms, and we want to preserve the right to have self-defense. And so that, like, it comes back to responsibility. And when we start to legislate those things, it actually creates more stigma, where people are afraid to get help because they're afraid, you know, to say, wow, if I mention this, or if I confront somebody who's on the range who looks to be in crisis, am I going to be held liable for this? Like, it creates scenarios where people fall through the cracks and they don't get help, or they don't help somebody else because they're so worried about those kind of lawsuits. It's just I hate it. And instead we need to say, what's the right thing to do and how can we educate people and provide options so they can have self-governance? That's what liberty is about. And I think that whatever industry people are in, if they can promote self-governance and provide options, that it's a beautiful thing to help humanity. And I hate weaponized agendas that prevent people from seeking help or offering help. So I just want to be clear about that.
I agree. It was something, it's been more than 20 years ago, and we have done such a disservice to those that need to be served in the mental health community. Not as firearms owners, as Americans. We've really kind of just let those people free to suffer. And I know law enforcement more than 20 years ago made very concerted efforts into crisis intervention response. It's at least part of your continuing education in the state of Oklahoma. That is a part of your annual training every single year. And it was met with, groans and grumbles. The worst group in the world are law enforcement, as far as, you want me to change what? I'm not changing. But then all of a sudden you saw the fruits of those trainings, and it really became a thing. And yes, we still have issues. We still have guys that, because on the law enforcement end and on the self-defense end, I don't make a decision that I'm going to go out and harm somebody. I'm going to defend myself. And I just think we've seen a tremendous improvement in that regard. And so the same with me, as I'm retired. I'm not in law enforcement. I am a civilian gun owner and carrier now. And I still shoulder that great responsibility of safe firearms ownership and carry and everything else. And if, as an instructor, and I've been a firearms instructor for 25 years, as an instructor, if I have those additional tools to recognize something that might be wrong when somebody steps on the line, then I have something that may actually save a life. I don't know that it will, but I have that opportunity if I have that knowledge. And I think that's a big deal. So
I agree.
It's not a, as Phil was saying, I can't take responsibility in the 2A community because somebody chose to utilize a certain means as their exit strategy. But I do have other responsibilities, and part of that is if I have the opportunity to recognize and see this, and it's like I've had things just myself as far as recognizing, somebody is completely depressed. And if you don't understand depression, if you've not experienced depression or had training in that regards, you're like, well, why are you sad? They're not sad. They're apathetic. They don't give a crap. And there's a big difference there. I mean, it's not a sadness. It's an overwhelming kind of consuming thing. And it's just a really dark place for them to be. So the more education we get, especially as people that are leaders in the community, as far as the 2A community. That's one of the things Phil and I are always talking about is training and education and de-escalation and providing those things. And we've had members that write into us and tell us, oh my gosh, I was in this situation, and had I not heard this piece of information from you guys, my decision probably would have been this, and it would have got me arrested. So
It's very comparable, isn't it? That when you
yeah.
educate people, they can make informed decisions, which again is self-governance, and it might be an informed decision in a crisis to, choose to engage, or to choose to take cover, or to however you might need to help, especially when you have that responsibility because you're also carrying a firearm. So it's the same kind of education, and that type of education can help gun owners to make informed decisions about their own personal care, but also for in their household. If there is a firearm in the household and they have, again, like a spouse suffering from postpartum depression, it might be a good thing to just consider, do they have access to firearms? Maybe there's a teenager that has, showing signs of addiction or cutting or other warning signs, and that the parents who are gun owners can make a decision. How am I going to make sure that my teenager does not have unauthorized access to firearms? We do not. This is a non-legislative, voluntary thing that gun owners take the personal responsibility to say, I'm going to, and this is in the scope of how they might order their day entirely. It's within that scope and context of responsible living, which can also include making sure that people in our home know that they're loved, and that they can, have a conversation, even if it's 2:00 in the morning and they need to talk to someone, that they can, you're there to support them if they want to seek help. It's within that context. It is, the opposite of that is, again, creates stigma, and it's a hyper focus on a firearm, which is just a hunk of metal, right? And it's a very useful hunk of metal. It's a very useful tool. But when there's a hyper focus on that, then all of those human things, like those conversations and seeking care and making sure that person, has food and that they're sleeping okay and that they're keeping up with whatever they need to be doing in order to get through the day. If it's within that context, then that focus is on people and healing and creating a life that people want to wake up to the next day. All of that falls through the cracks when there's a hyper focus on firearms. And that is where people who really, really want to push for gun control, ultimately, they are completely missing the mark, and they are not doing a service to people who are in crisis.
Well, and most of them are completely uneducated and have been driven by foolish things from people with an agenda. And all of a sudden, well, I listened to Sarah and I believe her. So whatever Sarah told me has got to be true.
Informed decisions, right?
Yeah,
Do your own research. Many people don't.
You have an obligation to absolutely dig into this yourself. It's one of the things that for whatever faults we have, it's still why America is the greatest country on the planet. It just is.
If we took our obligation as private citizens to dig in and find things out and do the right thing, wouldn't be any needs to conceal carry, right?
Yes.
And it is what we're dealing with. Again, it goes back to the hard issues. It's all of us abdicating responsibility to something else, to let somebody else run it, in charge, not doing what we need to do. You mentioned the teenagers, cutting, those kind of issues. If you've got you have got to spend time with your teenagers. You have to spend time with them. You can't let them isolated. Run them hard, go to bed tired, and then do it again the next day, because you've got to keep them busy. This is the time where they grow and set themselves up for the future. And to leave them to their own devices is not a good thing. So we have that responsibility. You have to be engaged with your children. You have to be engaged with your nieces and nephews and know what's going on with them and their parents. You need to be aware and to care. I think that's probably was part of your motto there, Sarah, is aware and care.
Yes. And I have my kids are ages 21 down to 15, and I have 5. And I love everything that. Yes.
As a young mother with 5 kids like that. Wow.
So I'm also, one of my jobs is a range safety officer at a youth league, and we help kids ages 8 to 18 learn how to safely use firearms, but really enjoy shooting sports. So all of the things that you said are just very front and center, and they're within that context of, what does liberty look like? What is creating a world and helping our next generation to love life? What does that look like? And how does responsibility fit into that? And, again, that could be a whole nother show. But it is so important that we don't just, okay, well, I've got all my boxes checked, but not have a good relationship with our kids. They need encouragement too. They might have a lot of book smarts, and they have, they might hear things online or whatever, but they don't necessarily have the experience to make good decisions. They don't have the experience of going through heartache or, have experiencing a failure. They don't know what that looks like. And there's a lot of fears just because they're young. And so we have this tremendous opportunity to say, tomorrow's a new day. What did we learn? How can I pray for you? How can I help take care of you and support you? And those things have to be in that context. And in that big scope of, again, like, what do we do with lethal means if there's a concern in our household? And so when it is in that context, again, it just empowers people and helps them to feel appreciated and loved and safe. And that's really our goal as parents, as friends, as fellow members of our churches, as members of our community. How can we empower people to make good decisions for themselves and for their households, and to really thrive?
So good. Phil, do you got anything you want to add? Any takeaways from today?
There's one thing, but she finished so nicely. I don't want to mess that up. But we think about our news sources like James O'Keefe, Project Veritas. You see the things he's bringing up with New York Times and the suppression of facts that have been in our news media. Now we see that as adults, but think about this for your teenagers and 12-year-olds and 10-year-olds. They're on their phones, they're on computers, they're on streaming services. Their information is never really corrected. They don't see the other side of that. So you really have to stay involved with them, because they're not getting great influence through their media sources and choices. Look at who the social media influencers are, right? They're all half naked and stupider than a rock. They're the ones that the kids are listening to. And so it's important. I just think that the suicide thing, you look at the suicides in the teenage years, those are such tough years that you have to really, as a parent or as an involved adult who knows a child, that you really have to look for that and make sure that their inputs, it's not garbage in, garbage out. Make sure their inputs are at least screened, because somebody else is talking to them all the time, and they're not giving them the great information.
And they're not interacting with the humans, young people as viewers either. So it's not like the young people can, ask those celebrities online, tell me what your real life looks like when you're not on camera. Like there's no opportunity for that kind of conversation. And I can tell you as a parent that even when we do our best to protect our kids from getting misinformation, they're going to find it. And so I encourage parents to have hard conversations with their kids, and to, talk about what's going on in the world, to talk about things like substance abuse, to talk about, friends that are in crises, to help our kids to understand, like, the importance of hard work and being responsible and having goals, encouraging parents to work with their kids when they are having a hard time, and help them to see, hey, the future looks bright if we can do these things together. But so many parents they're just like, how was school today? And the kid's like, fine, and that's it. And that's their conversation. And then the rest of the night, they're just seeing their locked door to their kid's locked door, and they're not engaging. We love playing board games at our house. We love doing like service projects with our church. We love having friends over and listening to what's going on in their life and having meals together. So all of those things are suicide prevention. And again, if you're hyper focused on a firearm, you're only focused on lethal means. You're not focused on protective factors. And the firearms community is a tremendous protective factor. We have the best of the best in our community. We have people who actually care about making a difference. And so something we hope to foster through our Hold My Guns partner locations is that there are opportunities, for example, for families who are gun owners to like go volunteer at their local food bank together, or, go help to beautify some graves of veterans who have fallen and they're buried in the local graveyard, or to help, brighten, to go maybe sing at a retirement home, or whatever that might be, volunteer with Habitat for Humanity, and to create opportunities for people to get out of isolation, to feel like, hey, I did something valuable today. I brought my kids with me and they learned the value of hard work and helping people. All of that is suicide prevention. And we really want to emphasize that, creating a community that makes us want to wake up in the morning. And, when we can emphasize protective factors, shooting with our friends at their range, fun competitions, clay shooting or whatever, those are things that we're interacting with people, we're having conversations about, life as we're out volunteering together or out in the range together. And those kinds of things are really a positive influence. And so we as a firearms community, we can emphasize the opportunities that we have to encourage one another while we're strengthening relationships and listening to one another and strengthening our communities as well.
Let's have one other thing. I want her to move in next door. I think she'd be the best neighbor I ever had. So,
oh,
Sarah, I love your heart and your passion. I appreciate you so much for coming on and sharing with us. We got to stay in a little closer contact. I think I need to introduce you to more people in the company. We were, as you're talking about the things we can do and things that we can, that they're just a daily suicide prevention.
Mm-hmm. And we have to prioritize them, don't we?
Yes.
We can't just put off, oh, I'll get to talking with my kids later, or I'll check in on my neighbor later. No, make the batch of cookies, take them over, say, hey, can I help you with any yard work on Saturday? I have some time, even if we don't have tons of time, whatever we can do to help people. I hope that is the big takeaway here, that is good for us from a mental health perspective, and it's good for people who we can serve. And it's also good when we allow people to serve us too, knowing the value of, of training people to look out for the needs of other people. And I think in the firearms community, we tend to just be like, wow, I'm really self-sufficient. I've got 3 months of food stored up. I have, all this ammunition. I have firearms, in strategic places all around my home, and I have my property mapped out for defense, and I don't have a wood pile stacked up by my windows so people can climb in. And we think about all of those things, and we get this almost prideful mindset where when we are in crisis, we're afraid to ask for help and we are afraid to reach out. And so if we have it's normal to help people, then it can also be normal to encourage people to say, how are you doing, Sarah? Do you need anything? And that reduces stigma for these kinds of conversations when life kind of takes a turn. So I hope that people are encouraged to become more aware about, mental health things and having options, but also knowing that suicide prevention is really immersing yourself in exactly what's in front of you and caring for people and caring for your community in a way that builds you up, but it also builds up the people around you as you seek to serve others.
One of the things, Rob, we always talk about is situational awareness. Well, what she just said, this is suicide prevention is situational awareness in relationships.
Yes.
Yeah.
How would you know a person's baseline if you have situational awareness if you don't know what their normal day-to-day is like? And the same thing with situational awareness with your neighbors around you. If all of a sudden you see a neighbor every day picking up their newspaper at a certain time and they walk their dog at a certain time and all of a sudden they're not there, and then they're not there the next day, something's off. And so you have to make a choice. Am I going to knock on their door and be like, hey, are you okay? Or are you just going to ignore it? And then, you show up on the news. Well, they always walk their dog at a certain time every day. They seem like such an upstanding, we just hear stories of people all the time that don't really know their neighbors very well. But the same thing with our neighbors on the range. Like, how often do we say, how are you doing today? Come over for dinner. Like, we see you guys all the time. Let's hang out, or whatever it might be. You need to know people's baseline in order to help them. And that is situational awareness. Ignorance is not very good situational awareness. So yeah, I could talk about that all day.
Bang. And just like that, she's got it like that. It's funny. It's actually my favorite local radio station has a little thing they say all of the time. And it makes me smile every single time. And they say, the world is full of kind people. And if you can't find one, be one.
Be one. I love that.
I do too. Again, I want to thank everybody for tuning in and joining us again. We are so honored to come in and share with you. I hope you pick up some things. As always, we are always welcoming your questions, comments, concerns, suggestions. In Phil's case, a critique or two.
Love it.
Or three. Sarah, thank you so very much. I appreciate everything you shared with us today. I'm hoping that we've got somebody out there that takes something away from this. And again, you guys can always reach me directly at rob@ccwsafe.com. Thank you so much, and we will see you next week.